Senator Shoebridge.
Oh, thanks, Chair. While we're in this space, the government awarded a contract to the Jesuit Social Services, and they announced the contract in August of last year, said to be funding to establish and deliver an expanded child sexual abuse prevention service, which includes a free and anonymous helpline, website and online self-help resources for adults who are concerned about their own or someone else's sexual thoughts, feelings or behaviour towards children. Are you aware of the grant? Are you aware of that grant?
Yes, we're certainly aware of it,
yep.
Senator.
Was there a tender for the grant?
Yes, there was. There was a tender process for that.
Was it a full and open tender?
Yes.
Yes.
How much is that grant for?
The Australian Government committed $4.03 million per annum ongoing from 23-24 to establish the National Child Sexual Abuse Offending Prevention Service. I'll just check. Yep. Is there anything to add about that quantum?
That's how much was committed, but what's the grant? What's the funding for the Jesuit Social Services?
So, sorry, Senator Shoebridge, there's two different things. So the Jesuit Social Services was awarded under a procurement process, and then there's a more recent grant that's come out for the non-offending service, the service for non-offending family members. So if it's Jesuit, then it's the procurement process.
So your question, Senator, is how much money was awarded to the Jesuit Social Services for?
Yeah, they say they've received funding from the Australian Government.
Yes.
How much?
Do we have the precise? That was the number that Ms Bing just provided?
$4 million a year. For how many years? Because you said that was in the budget since 2022. Yep. This announcement was made in August of 2025.
Yes, so the contract is for, as I was with Barron's for the precise details, how many years is the contract?
I think it's for a 2-year contract with extension. So we'll have to, we can take
the specifics on notice,
yeah.
But I believe a 2-year contract with
an option
the potential for extensions, which is fairly ordinary for government practice.
And do you know how many organisations tendered for it?
I don't recall the specifics. We'd have to take that on notice.
Can you provide that on notice? One of the concerns that's been raised with my office from the survivor community is that, in fact, if you look historically at the findings from the Royal Commission, the Jesuits were part of a series of orders amongst the Catholic Church and other religious organisations that had an appalling history of child sexual abuse. How is it that an organisation with that history is being given this responsibility by the Australian Government?
So the answer to that, Senator, is that they were selected through an open procurement process based on the clinical services and expertise that organisation has.
Well, I mean, this may well have been the best decision in the circumstances, given what was in the tendering, but was none of the tendering criteria looking at whether or not the organisation may have offended in the past, or its members, critical members of it, may have offended in the past? Was that no part of the tendering process here?
We'd have to take that on notice. I don't recall the specifics, but I would imagine the tendering documentation would have been about the ability of a tendering organisation to deliver what is a very complicated and difficult service prevention and one that is aimed at interrupting offending before it happens. The focus of the approach to market would have been to seek the most competent, most skilled organisation to deliver what is an inherently difficult service.
I mean, it is inherently difficult, and it takes some political courage to say you're going to fund services to prevent offending. So the concerns that have been raised with my office are that this funding is going to the Jesuits or any organisation that has significant findings against them in the Royal Commission and in civil court cases and criminal court cases about child sexual offending. How is it that isn't a disqualifying factor when you're tendering in this space?
Senator, I think what I would say is, as it was implied by Mr Collette, that The number of organisations that actually have the capability that was required in this space is not large. I note the issues that you've raised or have been raised with you in your office. Obviously, there was a very thorough assessment process that the department went through with the procurement process to assess appropriateness. I suppose that the focus was on an entity that we thought could deliver the service going forward.
Well, I mean, one of the other concerns, and, you know, I could have brought the Royal Commission findings here to say that one of the long-standing concerns was that institutions, religious orders and others had evidence about child sexual abuse and then didn't provide that to the police. One of the long-standing tragedies and institutional failures that repeated across a variety of different organisations, churches, sporting organisations and others, having, you know, detailed evidence, sometimes confessions, systemic records of child sexual abuse, and they're not providing that to police. And now we find the government funding a religious organisation to consciously take anonymous calls about potential child sexual abuse. You can't see that. I mean, it's not surprising to me that parts of the survivor community are really concerned about how this will work in practice, given the history.
Senator, we very much respect the concerns that parts of the survivor community have here. This is an issue that has been raised with us. I can understand where you're coming from. As I said, the tender documents would have been premised and were premised on seeking the most competent organisation to deliver the service. The process went through a rigorous assessment, practice as is the case with any government procurement, and the most successful, competent tenderer was identified. We recognise the historical issues that you're raising. The focus was on delivering the service that's now available in the Australian community.
They're also asking how it's going to work in practice. If somebody's on the phone disclosing evidence of child sexual abuse, if they identify a victim or there's other evidence that might help identify the location or the institution or the victim, what are the Jesuits going to do with that information? Is it going to be anonymous? Is there protocols for when they provide it to the police and prosecuting authorities? I mean, where are the answers to these kind of obvious questions the survivor community are going to be asking about this service?
Look, they're very good questions, Senator, and I would suggest they're relevant questions irrespective of who would be providing this service. There is a real complexity here in how a clinical intervention service that is available to somebody who is experiencing thoughts or feelings around potentially offending is interrupted. Being able to be accessible to somebody in that position so they reach out and are intervened before they offend is inherently challenging. There are a range of requirements built into the contract around mandatory reporting, oversight and so on that goes to protecting against these sorts of issues. But this is inherent in the nature of this service.
Well, I mean, is it a clinical service? Is the person on the other end of the line a medical practitioner, and therefore the confidentiality that would apply to somebody disclosing to a medical practitioner is retained? Is it just a counsellor? And I don't mean to minimise counsellors, but counsellors don't have the same protections at law in disclosures that might happen. I mean, how does this work in practice?
So all of the helpline technicians are trained in a clinical setting. Obviously, as Mr. Collette said, there is mandatory reporting, so it is an anonymous website, but if there is information that is provided to the helpline operators, they will make a report to police with as much information as they have available. So
if somebody phones up anonymously, discloses information about their potential offending or their past offending, and that might match other evidence that the organisation has that might allow them to identify where that offending happened. Is there that kind of data matching and then the information being provided to police?
I'm not sure, Senator, I follow your question. What other information does the organisation have?
Well, they may have other anonymous disclosures that give that they if they match the evidence together, like a investigative body could identify where the abuse may have happened, or if the abuse was real, might help identify and save a victim. Like, is that happening with this?
They would make each report to the police, yes, while it is an anonymous service, they do have potential identifiers that people might choose to give, but again, this would be a matter that they would report to the police, and the police would use the information as they best could.
Could I ask you on notice maybe just to provide some details about what the protocols are and how this will work in practice about the information? And I also just want to stress that there are so many survivor groups out there that are desperate for funding to help survivors. I mean, when they found out that there was $4 million a year going towards this program and not helping survivors, they do feel frozen out. You know, and I can think of groups like SAMSN, for example, who have been desperate for a couple of $100,000 to provide national support for male survivors of child sexual abuse. They can't get in the front door, and they see $4 million going to the Jesuits like this a year. It is really raising multiple concerns.
I would just I acknowledge that and acknowledge the needs of survivor groups. But the funding for this particular project is in the space of trying to find ways to prevent the offending or the behaviours in the first place.
Well, Secretary, and I understand what a hard task that is, and I'm not trying to say that's not a worthy task, but given who's providing it and given the context.
Yep. We certainly appreciate the complexity and the challenge that this represents, and I think, like you, Senator, we have met with many organisations, non-government service providers, victim survivors, advocates. This is a really challenging space, and we certainly acknowledge that.
Thank you, Senator Schubert.